in the last 2 days that I've been here, I've been hearing the word networked, thrown around a lot, and it means a lot of different things. So I wanted to just start by kind of being more explicit about the type of networks that I generally work with. And we focus, I guess I can give the general definition that we use for networks overall, which is talking about nodes that are connected to each other through links. And so that can mean computer networks, but it can also mean social networks, which is usually what we focus on. And so that's people being connected to other people through relationships. And we focus on social impact networks, meaning networks that are formed to help bring about social change. And specifically, we have focused on generative networks. So with the intention of having networks that will sustain and be able to be activated over time, rather than sometimes you hear about coalitions, which are usually have a specific goal in mind, and then they disband afterwards. So just making that distinction when we get started. As mentioned, I've been working with networks for a while now, and what I thought would be useful to share with this group is some of my experience about how the kind of the strategic and intentional practice of a network mindset can be helpful. Because I think we've heard a lot about how the network effect or working collaboratively is an important aspect of addressing complex social changes, getting the diverse groups of people together. But I think anyone who has tried that understands that it is a lot harder to do than to talk about. And so that's what I wanted to spend a little time on. And I mentioned, I think, in the bio that a lot more detail is in this book, Connecting to Change the World. There's a lot more case studies and examples of groups that we've worked with. And actually, if you are not ready to commit to purchasing a book, on our website, there's kind of an earlier handbook that we put together called Net Gains that you can download the PDF for free. Maybe start there. There's also a lot of other resources if you're interested. A bit of history. I have started my career in politics and worked with politicians, and then was also in a lot of policy advocacy work, and actually ran a firm called Cause Communications that did a lot of advocacy. And there were, I think as people have talked about over the last few days, there are a lot of situations where people have great intentions to work together, but many times the actual implementation looks more like this, where it's just not aligned. It's very frustrating. And so after a number of years of being involved in this, I kept thinking there's gotta be more to this. So I took a more focused study in looking at in this trial and error process, what is actually working, and focused more on trying to understand what is working and assessing what is the impact or the progress that we're making, focusing on the strategies and approaches to working together. And one of the things that we talk about is really a mind shift or a mental model to help you think about working in a different way. And so we talk about a network mindset. Oh, and I figured the best way to start talking about this is to give a very specific example, and picked, since one of the topics for this group was the environment. There is a network called REAMP in the upper Midwest. It's about 160 organizations now, very diverse, everything from kind of transportation, energy, faith-based groups of different flavors. And they have been working together for, I guess, close to 10 years now on transforming the energy economy from the ground up in the upper Midwest. And they have created this goal of reducing the global warming pollution economy-wide by 80% in 2050. And they have actually made a lot of progress. And the last, I guess, 6 years, they have 150 coal plants slated for retirement, and no new coal plants have been built. I'll talk a little bit more about why that kind of goal was chosen as their strategy, but it has been described as one of the most effective movements within the environmental movement to date. So, how did they accomplish this? Obviously, there are many factors that are involved in their success, so I'm not going to say that their network mindset is the only thing that did this, but it is one of the things that contributed to it. So we want to look at a couple principles that they applied in their work and how that helped. So the first is really thinking about the system. this group started with a small core of about 12 people that came together, and one of them described it to me as saying, I was sick of losing these battles. It was an environmental advocate, and so I thought, if there's a new way to try, let's work and see how it goes. So they met for a year and really kind of from kind of erased where they were starting at and built their understanding of the system, of the energy system in their region, and looked at all the players and how the different issues intersected and were interdependent. And from that, they did this over an entire year period of time. So there was definitely times when people felt like things were moving slowly, but this was required in order to really get the full understanding of how all these pieces fit together. And they through this process, they understood that there were really kind of 4 main levers of change. And one area that was very underutilized was a focus on closing down coal plants, because they realized they weren't going to get the growth in renewables until they shut down coal. And so they actually shifted a lot of energy to that. And so that's where the thrust went to focusing on closing of coal plants, and then that has accelerated the growth in others. But the recognition, a lot of the members talk about a recognition of shifting their mindset to looking at like their piece as part of a larger whole and understanding that context and working differently as a result. So the second, building trust first. So as I mentioned, that this was a group that started, now there are 160 organizations. It started with about 10 people and went through this process of really understanding the system. And then once they identified 4 main levers, they identified 4 leaders for each of those areas, and then they chose kind of 6 to 10 other organizations that they trusted with an expertise in that, and built from there. So these were relationships where they focused on trust building, and many times it was they had a relationship with the individual. I think this is something that the people in this room understand, that you may represent an organization, but the trust and the relationship is built from person to person, and then can grow from there. So thinking about that mindset and understanding that you're not going to get very far unless you have the trust established. And the third is really sharing as your default, which can be really hard because many organizations, it's about having information at your disposal that no one else has. And so the default has to be that you're keeping a flow of information going with others. And a dimension of that is making sure that you have multiple channels to communicate, because people take in information in different ways. So if you're thinking about a network, it's creating that communications infrastructure so that some people get information from the extranet or from online. Other people really do better if it's an email or even a conversation, and understanding that and making sure that there are multiple ways to communicate. The next is being clear about collective value. And so that's really being conscious of the fact that you have to, that the group for sustainability over time, you have to be aware of why do people keep coming back, and so what's the collective value, what can you accomplish together that you couldn't accomplish alone, but then also recognizing that every person in the room has to have some value proposition for them. So why are they coming back? And within REAMP, they do a survey every year of their membership and ask, what are the things that the network is doing that's really helping you, and so that they are able to then take that information into their planning for the next year. And overall, we found that being explicit about the network component is helpful, because even if it's a conversation, that brings it to people's minds, and they're able to then think about it more and be more intentional and strategic about it. And the last is embracing vertigo, which is a way to say that change is going to be constant, and we know that. But in particular, in thinking about the network specifically, you've got to be okay with the idea that you're going to be balancing and rebalancing continuously. And if you're looking for a sustainable network over time, that's going to mean that people are kind of moving from the core to the periphery, being more involved in leadership, less involved, and that's fine. That's how it should work. And that is one of the elements of the REAMP network, that they have a steering committee that rotates, and they have people who are elected, and they have tried to establish a distributed leadership so that it's not all on the steering committee. There are other groups that are also handling things so that portions can move forward, and it doesn't require the entire body. So I guess those are the top 5 principles that I thought would be useful for our conversation and thinking about how this group, but then could be thinking about a network, but then also any of the other work that you all are doing in working with other people. Thanks so much.